It's easier doing a big thing than a little thing. And the reason is the opportunity is bigger. It's easier to attract the best people. It's easier to attract capital. It's easier to attract clinical interest. Therefore, do big things. I've often spread myself too thin earlier in my career doing things that really weren't going to be big enough or meaningful enough. And I'd say make sure the juice is worth the squeeze on a career decision where it's whatever you're going to learn or you're going to attract or develop a mentor out of that situation. There's some return on investment that makes the juice worth the squeeze.
You can't replace part of the brain. Like,
you treat them the same.
Source of truth for the medtech industry.
Coexists with the puppets.
Robot understands things automatically.
Number one show in the medtech industry.
So Stryker got ahead of that and changed in the 90s, billion-dollar company. They had Help Up High, a lot of things. You stayed in medtech.
With your host, Omar M. Khatib.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. As always, for his triumphant annual return, guest Scott Huennekens. You know him as an investor, a board member, a serial entrepreneur. I think this is like what, V3 or V4 of you being on the show. You've been on the show a few times. You're a crowd favorite. So Scott, welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
Doing great. Always excited to see you, and thank you for all you're doing. It's wonderful to see the sharing of information that's happening that's to the benefit of patients in medtech.
I appreciate that. It means a lot. So for context, I'm going to kind of frame this up for the audience so they know what this is about. So, as they saw from the episode title, that we're going to be talking about your, the hardest lessons you learned from the worst deals that you had. And the way this came about was that at our favorite event, LSI Dana Point, you and I were talking. And we're talking about how a lot of
drink or two involved.
There might have been a drink or two involved. That is true. That is true. It was, it was in the evening time. It was at the height of the event, and we were talking about how most business books are kind of just BS. It's kind of like a lot of fluff and success and everything, and nobody talks about hard things. And we started talking about Ben Horowitz's book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, and Great book. And my comment to you, I was like, Scott, we need to do our industry's version of the hard things about hard things. And who better to do it than you and I? So thank you so much for doing this. I know you spent a month or two kind of outlining it.
A number of failures,
Yeah, well,
you're not trying hard enough. You're not going for it enough if you don't have a number of challenges.
And again, like if people go to your LinkedIn profile and they see that banner with all the logos there and everything, there's also like a graveyard of a lot of skeletons because, this is just the name of the game that we're in. So I'll turn it over to you and let's get started about the hard things that you've learned from the worst deals that you've had.
Yeah, I think to start off, like we were just talking, it's important to understand what your goals are. Going into any decision making. So before we get to the bad decisions or bad process and mistakes I've made, and hopefully there's some lessons to be learned in there. And for me, just going through this process, getting ready for this, it reinforced some lessons to be learned and applied going forward. But up front is, I'd say to the listener out there, what is your success? How do you define your success? If you don't know the destination or where you want to go, kind of hard to put the address in Google Maps to get you there. So understanding that up front and then kind of defining that, like I've shared with you, my 5-year planning process and having this 20 or 30 year overarching goal that's out there and looking at how you define that success across 7 or 8 different criteria: your family, your fitness, your financial, all of those criteria, and having a plan is very, very helpful because that leads into what do you want to achieve and what do you want to go after relative to making decisions on your career, making decisions on these different investments, how you're going to spend your time. It also ties into what is your identity and, where are you at in your phase of your life? We all go through multiple phases and your identity has to continue to evolve across that time spectrum to match up to where you want to, be and what you want to do at any particular, point in time. So I'm going to talk about, some bad decisions I made managing my career. I'm going to talk about some bad decisions that I've made in investing in those 5 examples. So, in addition to those goals, I think it's important to know who you are. We were just talking about that a little bit off camera, and I didn't really know who I was. I went to business school, and that's the very first time I'd ever heard of Myers-Briggs. And it was like, okay, you're an ENTJ. Oh, that sounds good. That's the commander category. A lot of CEOs are that. And I want to be a CEO. And that's my identity. And that's my goal. I want to start companies and build them and the like. But to be an effective ENTJ, or, if you use the color scheme, I was, yellow, red, which was more synthesizer builder, wanting to be in control, strength finders, like whatever the criteria, understand who you are. There's no right or wrong, but you're going to have to lead and manage and work with other people to get to those right decisions as you go. So, I think it's important to state some of that up front, because knowing who you are going into decision making and how you relate to other decision makers will help you. So I know from those criteria, having looked back, that being an ENTJ and being a hyperachiever and the kind of positive intelligence book criteria, and also being highly restless, guess what? I'm impatient. And guess what? I'm overconfident at times. So I got to understand those and put guardrails up in my decision making in order to address some of those strengths, which are also can be weaknesses. Does that make sense to you?
It makes a lot of sense. And I think it's important for people to understand that. And I think just to kind of dig deeper into that as to why it's important to understand yourself. By understanding yourself, and also, I think also understanding who you're not, you sort of identify and exploit your weaknesses, And so just like, I'll give you an example from my career, is that something that I had a tendency towards was anything that was shiny. So it was like a title, exposure, etc. And I learned that was kind of a weakness of mine. And that any time that I was exposed to some opportunity that promised that, my guard would go down, and I would not do my due diligence on things. I got burned a few times too. So I think it's very important to understand those things. I completely agree with you.
And that's going to be my number one, and I call it my Letterman's jacket phenomena. But I'll get into that when
that's a good heuristic that you just came up with. That you call it the Letterman's jacket phenomenon. I'm going to use that. I got to use it. That's a good one.
I'll explain why. But so, basically coming into this, knowing what your status is going to help you. And because you do need those guardrails for your personality type. And the like, just as you said, you're attracted to shiny things. It's funny. I was reading, I followed Daniel Pink as well, like on Instagram, and he had a great post just like a week ago that ties into this, where he was talking about this concept from Tina Seelig at Stanford, where you should not do your resume of success. You should do your resume of failure. It's basically create a failure resume, your flops, your screw ups, your bad decisions. And he went back, Daniel Pink, and said, okay, here's my comeuppance. My 2 biggest things are starting projects based on untested assumptions. I thought I knew enough and didn't do my homework. That was my biggest one. My second biggest one was saying yes to things I was not fully committed to. Kind of half-hearted effort equaled half-hearted results. But the takeaway was, once he identified those two, then once spotted, he could work on them and fix them. So you've heard me talk before about PDCA, 7-step processes: plan, do, check, adjust. He basically wasn't doing adequate planning. He was doing, and then now he's checking so he can adjust and continue to improve that PDCA loop. And that's what I hope to accomplish with you on this podcast as we dive into my list. I have a longer list than two. Daniel Pink maybe is a little smarter and doesn't make as many mistakes. But do those resonate with you as well?
100%. No, 100%. And I think, I think that what's interesting about your career is that the more time you spend reflecting, the more you're able to unlock those insights. I think all the answers, a lot of times when people are looking for advice, a lot of the answers are within them. They just need to get exposed to the right information, data, stories, etc., to sort of unlock that and follow their intuition,
No, absolutely. It's goes back to a very old book. I learned everything I needed to know in kindergarten, right? And if you go back to this, it's not overly complicated. And I always like listening to like Charlie Munger's insights as it relates to investing in his little clips. I mean, like Buffett, they just got the greatest.
everybody's surrogate grandfather,
Yeah, and this reporter, I remember him asking him, like, when did you learn all this? He's like, I learned it when I was 7 years old. It's not complicated. We make things more complicated. So, all right, you ready to dive into my 6-pack of learnings, and then we can apply them to some situations?
100%. Oh wait, it's a 6-pack. I thought it was 5, so you added an extra, so you made it a 6-pack.
No.
All right.
There's 6 packs of mistakes, 5 worst deals, but they all kind of come out of these mistakes. Like Daniel Pink's 2 mistakes. These are 6 kind of criteria mistakes that are my watch outs. So
let's do it. I've been waiting. I love all my guests. We have a great time, but this one I've been waiting literally since May. Or April technically when we first talked about it. So we have to reschedule with you. So yeah, I'm ready.
It needed to be a 6-pack because this was all born out of a beer or 2. So
yeah, exactly. So I'm ready. Let's do it.
So the first one is this Letterman's jacket syndrome. And, what I mean by it was, I'm a sophomore in high school, and I played basketball and I played soccer, and they were both at the same time of the year. And I was 5'5", 105 pounds when I got my first license at 16, not exactly the body of a basketball star, a possible soccer player. But I love basketball, but I was a much better soccer player. And, background wise, single, parent family, had to pay for my own college. Like soccer wise, hey, there was an opportunity potentially to get some scholarship money and be a D1, soccer player. There was no money coming my way, being a basketball player. And I could be a varsity basketball player, maybe my junior year, maybe play some my senior year, maybe be a D3 at some academic school. Whereas, the Letterman's jacket could come earlier as a sophomore, and I could be an all-league soccer player, et cetera, which I ended up being. And I traded kind of what I really was passionate about for the shiny thing of having a Letterman's jacket, to be like your friends who had them and wanting to achieve something. It's what I say goes against quality speed in your career. So quality speed is playing fast and not rushing, which is a John Wooden ism. And, getting a Letterman's jacket as a sophomore instead of a junior and trading off, what you're passionate about and what you really wanted to do for a shiny object, as you described it. And that could end up being titles. It can be jobs. It could be any number of things that is a weakness that I have found over and over again in my life, and decision making is something I have to check myself for.
I'm following. I'm just letting that sit right now. But yeah, as you're telling me this, because again, like for the audience, I have no idea what Scott has prepared. So I'm hearing this for the first time, just like you guys. So as he's telling me this, I'm literally reflecting on those times for me. I think for me, actually, probably the biggest one, like an example of that was how shiny medical school was for me. And I like moved heaven and hell to get into medical school. And I didn't do the due diligence of like, is this really what I want? All I was focused on was like the money that I was going to make and the respect I would have as an MD, yada, yada, yada. And then like 2-3 years in, I realized it's not for me and I left. And, I try not to regret anything in life, but if there's anything that I kind of in some ways regret is that I wish I stopped and like thought about this more, because the amount of energy I expended in my teens and 20s trying to get into medical school and then finally getting in, I mean, I could have built like 3 or 4 businesses. I mean, I could have done so many other things,
Yeah.
And so I got behind and I had to do a lot of catch up. Things worked out for me in the end. But I think that desire is like it's a really dangerous thing,
Yeah.
if you don't check it.
Well, as we'll get into in some of these other things, out of bad decisions and out of bad situations are often a lot of lessons can be learned. And, your persistence, your resilience and the like that you learned trying to achieve that objective, you then have applied in other areas to drive success.
What when you look at I don't want to generalize here, but like for those who don't believe me, go to Scott's LinkedIn profile and look at his banner. It's like a NASCAR logo. There's so many logos, which is just to share that like he's extremely active, investing, being on boards and everything. So you've dealt with at this point, I think, hundreds of entrepreneurs, and if you count the number of people that you didn't invest in or you gave advice to, it might be in the thousands. What do you feel like is a really common shiny object mistake that most entrepreneurs make, especially first-time ones?
That is the second one on my list. So
DC, I'm telling you, people, he did not share the list, but Scott and I, we're on the same wavelength constantly.
So the second one is entrepreneurial intoxication. Entrepreneurial intoxication. So I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to start things, and combine that with some impatience means you get too outcome focused. You're saying, I want to start something. I want to go, and it may not be the right thing. It may not be big enough. It may not be the right time, but they just want to be an entrepreneur. They want to, back to their goals. They want to be an entrepreneur, back to their identity. They identify as being an innovator, an entrepreneur. If I'm working at a big company or if I'm doing XYZ and I'm not doing that, I'm not achieving. And so that combination of rushing with a Letterman's jacket mentality combined with, your identity and your wanting to be an entrepreneur leads to, discounting challenges that these things are going to be. We used to have a saying at Baxter, everything takes twice as long, costs twice as much. And if it doesn't meet those criteria, you shouldn't invest in it. You shouldn't do it. I think sometimes now in medical devices, it could even be more than that. So be careful of entrepreneurial intoxication as the second thing. And I see it often with, as you brought up, these people who just want to start things. And just because it's a good idea or it can be done, just because it can be done doesn't make it a good idea and doesn't make it a good business. It has to meet certain criteria. And that ties back into what are your goals? I mean, which leads to my third one on the list, which John Onopachenko from J&J DC, and then worked with me at Volcano, used to say, is the juice worth the squeeze? And, it's got to be a big enough opportunity, or the opportunity has to be big enough to meet your criteria of what you're looking for. And people often say, oh, it's just as easy to do, a big thing is an easy thing. I say, no, it's easier doing a big thing than a little thing. And the reason is because the opportunity is bigger. It's easier to attract the best people. It's easier to attract capital, and it's easier to attract clinical interest. Therefore, do big things. You might as well do a big thing instead of a small thing. So, I've often kind of spread myself too thin earlier in my career doing things that really weren't going to be big enough or meaningful enough. And I would say, make sure the juice is worth the squeeze on a career decision where it's whatever you're going to learn or you're going to attract or develop a mentor out of that situation. There's some return on investment, that makes the juice worth the squeeze, the time you have to work, if the travel you have to be away from your family, but make sure it's worth it to do that thing. The fourth, you bring up that banner. That banner on my LinkedIn is an accumulation of 25 or 30 years, and something that I have a hard time with at times is saying no. And so a fourth lesson is learning less is more and saying no to opportunities, saying no to things that are going to take your time. It goes back to that Daniel Pink about being half in versus full in. And you're like, okay, I'll say yes, I'll make a minor investment, I'll take some calls from them, and then it just builds up in its time. You don't feel like you feel like you're over promising and under delivering. I like to under promise and over deliver. So often, for me, I've got to watch that, and stay fully committed, and less can be more. The fifth one is, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, just comment. Do you feel like when it comes to saying no, I completely agree, and I think that this is especially when you become, whether you're a VC-backed entrepreneur, or in my case, I wouldn't say I'm bootstrapped, but I mean I'm a small business owner, so I don't have any investments other than my own. That understanding the direction and the goal that you're trying to achieve is important in order to answer the question, do I do this, yes or no? Because if you have a clear idea of like, this is where I need to go, anything that isn't in line with that is an easy no.
Absolutely. So I would before I started this list of 6, I should have said, what are your criteria in making a decision? And I generally have 4. And those 4 are, number 1 is tuition. Am I paying tuition? Am I getting an experience? Am I getting a learning out of this that is scalable to help me achieve the longer term goals? Number 2 is impact. Is this going to have the impact that I want if it's successful? That's impact for patients, impact for my career, impact for my family, impact financially, but is it going to have the impact? The third is relationships and networking. I might do something that may not have as much financial impact or clinical impact, but it'll help me with a relationship. I've, domain financed Volcano, and they were a great partner. Jim Blair is an unbelievable mentor. Same with Olaf Bergheim. I owe those guys. And so, they had a investment in a biodegradable stent company here in San Diego and said, hey, can you serve on the board for a couple of years and help us try and figure this out? It didn't meet my criteria, but I'm like, yes, I can. I will return the favor that you gave me. And, you play it forward like that. If you have time, then that's okay. Then the fourth one is mentoring, and mentoring, both receiving early in my career or giving, later in my career for return. So when I'm making these career or financing decisions, like earlier, like I think people often are like, oh, I want to be in this field or this thing. They don't look at, well, who's going to be my mentor? My first boss at Baxter, at Edwards, was Mike Masson. That's a pretty good, first choice and luck in having, an incredible leader like that as a mentor. And then King Nelson was my next boss there. Incredible mentor, incredible leader who I've done numbers of things with those two people. They created 10 times more opportunities, for me. Same thing with like investors like Tim Walliger or J&JDC at Digirad, or, similar things with people along the way. So I feel like people often underappreciate, like being a mentor. Like I think, I've got 25 plus people that have worked for me that are CEOs, and I'm very proud of that. But when some people would leave, I'm like, that's fine. but you're kind of going to a situation which isn't as good. You're going to someone who's not as committed to your development back to achieving that goal and success we talked about at the beginning relative to what you want to achieve in your career, your identity, and the phase. So also it's returns across all of those that go into the decision making. If hopefully that makes sense to you.
That makes sense. 100%. No, 100%.
Yeah, and so the next one, fifth on the list of mistakes in the six pack, is friends and family money into deals. And I've made this mistake on my first 3 deals after leaving being a CEO. I never let friends or family invest in deals where I was CEO. That's where I should have let them invest because I had more control of the situation and probably more visibility into the outcomes. But based on those success, then now it's having people ask me if they can invest in my deals, and we'll get into some of those, but it's just not worth it. Period. And if you're successful, it's not that meaningful to their level of investment. If you're not, you just feel guilty and bad, and it weighs on you. So
your thing is raise money for friends and family for your thing that you're going to be the CEO founder of. Don't raise money for friends and family for an investment that you're investing in because you don't have as much control on the outcome. That's
I wouldn't take money from friends or family in any deal, whether I'm a CEO
really
or an investor. No.
Oh wow.
No. If I can't raise it from somebody else, then it's probably not a good enough deal.
That's the first time I'm hearing that, and I intuitively I agree. Because I think
friendship is way more important than any financial return. And I learned that in YPO, where they discourage you from investing in each other in a YPO forums businesses, because it can just create tension unnecessarily. And the friendship's not worth any modest, return over it. But if it's lost, it just.
And I think, this is a lot of founders are not going to like it because, money is definitely hard to come by these days. But if you find it difficult to raise the money from people who understand your space and everything, going and getting, I hate to call it this, but like dumb money, because the likelihood that your friends and family are people who are well-versed investors and even if they're well-versed investors, that they're in the space that you're in is pretty low.
Yeah.
So really, I think it's a really good point. Actually, I've never heard that before, but I agree. Yeah.
And the sixth one, when I sent a text out to 10 or 11 people as part of this, just to get investors their feedback, and the one that was on everybody's list was CEO, 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 and once again CEO. It's the most important thing. So investing, look, I learned this like at Digirad. It was not a great opportunity. It wasn't a great market. Markets beat great management teams. Markets beat great management teams. If the market's bad, nothing a great team is going to do. Bad CEOs lose in great markets, and that's a difference. Great CEOs do great in great markets. So you need great markets, and you need a great CEO. And situations where I've gone in where we have less than great CEOs, it's been a major problem, and you've got to transition and work through that. So
I don't want to get off topic too far, but just a quick, as I will call it, a side quest. If you had to put like 2 or 3 things to it, like what makes, I don't know what's more important as an investor, identifying a bad CEO or identifying a good CEO. Let's start there. Which one of those two is more important? And based on the one you pick, what are the 2 or 3 criteria?
Yeah. So look, first of all, I said markets win, right? So first thing is it's got to be a great market and a great situation where if you get the right CEO, they can be.
Can you put a number to, when you say great market, can you put a number to it roughly? Like, is it a specific market cap size? Is it a specific CAGR?
Yeah. So if we're kind of transitioning now into the next part, which is these bad deals, and you got to understand your criteria. And I think, as people say, when you deviate from those criteria is often when you end up making the mistakes. So if I look at my criteria now as an investor, it has to be $1 billion market opportunity, which
Minimum.
means
Okay.
minimum, which the juice has to be worth the squeeze. It has to be a large unmet clinical need. Hopefully it improves clinical outcomes, reduces costs, and improves access. Most things don't do all three, but at least do two of the three. For me, it's preferably in cardiology, neuro or surgery, which I have domain experience. Technical risk has to be retired. Clinical risk has to be retired. Regulatory risk has to be handled in that the strategy is approved. I have to feel very good about commercial access and competitive position. I don't like getting things where reimbursement has to be created. I just don't have time for that cycle. And you have to see where you can fit in competitively to compete and have the IP. The management and the investors have to be strong. Hopefully, a CEO has a track record of success, and investors have had a track record of success. And then the seventh thing is there have to be 4 or 5 people that want to buy this asset if it is successful. Just so your only exit isn't just an IPO. You've got optionality on the back end. So those are criteria I run things through and want everything to be green. There may be a situation where these things have to change in order for it to change green, but it's doable in a 6 to 12 month period. Changing a CEO, fixing a cap table, and the like. Those are manageable to do that.
Got it. And before we get into your five deals, can we just do a quick run through of the six pack real quick? Can you just list it off real quick?
So the 6 again are Letterman's jacket syndrome. Basically chasing the shiny object. Entrepreneurial intoxication. Juice has to be worth the squeeze. Less is more. Learning to say no to some things. There's opportunity costs in saying yes. Friends and family, just say no. Raise your money from professional, smart investors. And CEO.
Got it. Perfect. All right. Now let's get into the pain.
All right, you ready for some pain here?
No pain, no gain, right?
That's right. So before I do this, because people are like, you're really going to name names? And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to start with myself. But, Ron Machikari always had this saying. He was a great mentor of mine, the chairman of the board at Volcano, grew St. Jude from $2 to $14 billion exit and value creation. Just a great leader. But given some of his definitiveness, one of his top 10 sayings was face reality as it is. And so I think it's very important always to face reality. When you're doing that, plan, do, check, adjust. Don't tell yourself lies. Don't tell yourself falsehoods. Understand who you are. Again, if you do I'd encourage all of you, go check out Positive Intelligence and this Saboteur's assessment, because I'm a hyperachiever and I'm restless. Then I have lies that I tell myself, to justify my actions, but understanding those is important. So I don't lie to myself or others, and I can minimize my vulnerabilities in that regard. So with that said, look, I want to face reality here. This is part of that, what Daniel Pink said, understanding what his gaps are allows him to check those, adjust, and get better. So this is no knock on others not doing their jobs. I own all these mistakes, bad decisions. They're mine, and they're not made to point fingers at anybody as we look at each of these situations. So I've got the first 2 are career decisions. Then the other 3 are this next generation or next phase of my life, investment and joining boards. So the first one was a mid-career decision. I worked at Edwards. I was a director of marketing, and I was told I was one of 6 or 7 people in this age category that could be CEO of Baxter someday, and I was on that criteria. So that meant you had to move every 2 years, and I was given the option of being the VP of marketing for Edwards Cardiovascular in Japan, or the VP of marketing in Europe. And this would be across all of Edwards products, valves, bypass, honorary, etc. So great breadth of products and international experience, whether it was in Japan, or I could be the NovaCore VP of sales and marketing. So these were LVADs, artificial hearts, early stages, no approval in the US, big shiny object, artificial hearts, leading heart centers, title, VP, sales and marketing, first time in career. So that's kind of the background. Some of the other issues were, look, there were plenty of issues with this. So, and NovaCore was run as a division that was kind of like a startup within Edwards. So there was the Letterman's jacket phenomena, definitely, with the title and the pay. There was entrepreneurial intoxication of, hey, I'm going to be working with the president of this division to create this division and create artificial hearts. Even though there were all of these headwinds with the product, the technology area, the clinical indications. Also, there were founder issues because he was still there and he had his own views, which were maybe a little different than the new division president, who wasn't probably the best opportunity as a mentor, for me. And I kind of, sorry if this background, of course, the blower comes right in the middle of this.
You're good. You're good.
But anyway, I was overconfident. I discounted the risks. I'm like, we can overachieve these. In addition, I had to move my family to the Bay Area from Southern California with 2 young kids, and travel 300,000 miles a year. So, the back to, what were my goals at this point in my career? It was like, okay, get in sales and marketing, get international experience, continue to increase your, so it met a lot of those, but also the probability of failure of the product and the opportunity were extremely high, and the risk wasn't worth the reward. And, the product failed in commercial launch due to those clinical issues. We had to reboot the US trial. Commercialization was going to be delayed. And, I left after a year from that role a little bit with my tail between my legs, and, had to figure out what I wanted to do next. I could have gone and done something else within Baxter, but I definitely, looking back at it, go, I should have done one of the other two. And this Letterman's jacket phenomena of chasing titles and pay, as well as an entrepreneurial intoxication and overlooking obstacles and challenges and discounting them, got the best of me in that decision.
Do you think part of the lesson here was there was a lot of pull from the Letterman's jacket phenomenon, like you were running to something, but do you feel like there was also a strong push in terms of you're trying to escape from or run away from the current situation that you're in? So the combination of those two things were just one really powerful mistake waiting to happen.
Yeah, no, there was no running away, because I was being promoted into one of 3 different options, and the one just sounded and looked shinier, representing myself to the outside world. And that's something with age and a little bit of wisdom, I can admit my vulnerability to that. Whereas earlier, I probably wouldn't want to admit that to others because it's a weakness. We don't want to share our weaknesses with others, but I think, I like to play it forward. I like to mentor people. I like people to learn from mistakes that I've made. And so that's the sharing there.
Got it. Makes sense.
So then I'm sitting there, at NovaCore, and trying to decide, hey, do I do something else at Edwards and within Baxter, or do I leave and do something else? And I get a call from a good friend of mine, Vince Burgess, who's a VC in San Diego, and he's just led this $20 million financing for this company called Digirad. And, Digirad was making solid state gamma cameras, the first solid state gamma cameras, replacing vacuum tubes for nuclear medicine, these big imaging cameras, primarily used for cancer detection, but also for myocardial perfusion imaging in the heart. So if I would have thought of my criteria at the time to go do something entrepreneurial, it would have been more likely in cardiology, where I've just spent time in something that's not capital equipment, something that's 80%, 75% gross margin, therapeutic. But where did I go? I took this job because a good friend was the VC. I relied on him for the due diligence. It was well financed. It's back in San Diego, but it's capital equipment, no annuity stream, low margin, not a lot of domain experience to be gained. I was playing checkers when I should have been playing chess. I mean, it's like, again, entrepreneurial intoxication. I would be the COO of this company. It was an entrepreneur. I was defining myself as an entrepreneur. So this was entrepreneurial, but it wasn't the right domain. It wasn't the right investors. It wasn't the right market. It wasn't the right risks. It wasn't the right mentors. It was just too much about just entrepreneurship and living into this identity that I had established, and being overachieving and wanting to achieve things sooner rather than later. Back to the Letterman's jacket. So, it ended up the technology risk there had not been retired. The clinical benefit wasn't proven, really had no cost advantage. The CEO was not a good mentor candidate. The clinical benefit ended up being zero. The cost was negative, and access was a possibility if we could figure something out. So the outcome was the product and technology failed. The CEO got fired. I was promoted to CEO to figure out if there was anything to do here. I tried to give all the money back to the VCs. It was about $20 million still left. They said, figure something out. So we rebooted the technology to a small camera, cardiology focused. That could also be used in a service business. And so then spent 3 years as the CEO, got it to 40 million in revenue, filed to go public, and 9/11 happened. And so we had to pull our offering. In today's dollars, my stock was worth $20 million at that. In today's dollars today, I ended up leaving with $155, which I joke was not even enough to pay for a babysitter, go to dinner with my wife, and have a nice bottle of wine. But, so it was a lot of bad decision making as I walked through it didn't really meet the criteria I should have had, but I didn't have the criteria at that point in my career. So I'd encourage people, gotta have a set of criteria to make these decisions. Back to that list of 4 that I gave earlier, whether it's tuition, whether it's mentoring, whether it's financial, whether it's balance in your life, whatever it is, but have your criteria so you don't just react. I reacted, which ended up, in the end, it worked out because of, I got to the CEO level. I proved something which made me, I proved something in a B opportunity, which opened me up to A opportunities like Volcano, which was a bigger opportunity with better investors and the like. But in retrospect, the juice was not worth the squeeze. I shouldn't have been working in I should have been working in a cardiology product with bigger markets, higher likelihood for success, better mentors, more learnings to gather from it. And if I'd have taken the time, I could have created that opportunity. But I didn't. I jumped at something too fast without having criteria, without doing proper due diligence, and relying too much on others in making that decision.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that about relying too much on others. I think the other mistake people make is there are people that they admire as a whole, and they don't step back and say, hey, these are also people who are flawed just like me, and they have their own biases, etc. And so
Exactly.
like you have to take that into account. So even me, like a lot of people, a lot of young people I mentor, they'll ask me advice about like what they should go into and everything, and I'll give them some ideas, but I always tell them like, look, you should not listen to what I have to say about it, because ultimately you have to follow your intuition, and you know yourself better than anybody else. um because we're halfway into it, I want to stop for a second. I want to make a recommendation to the audience so that they can actually take action on this advice. So the best part is that this is going to involve AI. So what I want the audience to do is that when you're done with this, go on YouTube, find this talk that Scott and I have, and grab the YouTube link. Go to Notebook LM, which is a Google product, and put in the link to the YouTube. Ask it to come up with a summary and a detailed instructions for GPT. It's going to pull out a really long summary and detailed instructions, everything. Take those instructions and go to ChatGPT and feed it to him, and save that chat. And every time you're trying to make a decision, go to that GPT chat and have a conversation, which will essentially index all of these lessons that Scott's giving, and it'll help you a lot. I use AI almost for everything, personal, professional, etc. And it helps to really kind of gut check things. So make sure you guys do that. Okay.
That's a great piece of advice. It's super interesting on AI. Like my use of it is off the charts over the last year, to help in
Yeah.
so many different ways.
Yeah, who knows what it's going to what things are going to look like even a few years from now, because life changed dramatically just in the last like year or two, and I feel like we're scratching the surface. So, anyways,
Absolutely.
let's get back to, because I feel like we can definitely do a whole podcast just on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So transitioning from career decisions into some investment decisions, and I gave you those 7 criteria for investments: the $1 billion opportunity, technical, clinical, et cetera, multiple exit opportunities. So, those are the criteria. So as I was leaving uh, Verb Surgical with the agreement for J&J to acquire it, knew I didn't want to be a CEO going forward. I wanted to move into investing in boards, and looked at how I could do that, whether to raise a fund, or what I've ended up doing was create a virtual fund with family office investing with special purpose vehicles, and put together front foot ventures to do that. I was eager to get started, and I was, in retrospect, impatient, overconfident, and had exuberance to achieve. I'd been successful in every CEO role. At Volcano, we had an investment fund. We invested in 4 things. I think we had 5-6 times return. All 4 had successful exits. I had, been on EndoChoice's board at Volcano. EndoChoice ended up growing, going public. Boston, bought it. So it reminds me of that Buffett quote about, be careful about your success. It'll lead you to think that you can't fail, and that's just not true. And you get overconfident, and you don't do maybe all the work you did previously. And as a board member and an investor, you don't have as much control over the situation to influence the outcome. So one of the very first deals I did was a company called Wonder Medical. And so Wonder, I'll give you the background and the issues and the outcome. So Wonder was a big idea. We were going to do social media for physicians. They were all using Twitter. They still today primarily use, Twitter or X. We felt like we could develop better tools for communication with groups and sharing, and medical information could be HIPAA compliant, et cetera. There were companies like Doximity and Teladoc out there with $5 to $10 billion market caps with crappy products. We're like, God, if we can just do something reasonably well, we can create a tremendous amount of wealth. So Justin Davies was the CEO. He was a KOL in cardiology who I had worked with in my past at Volcano, had a strong relationship with. He had an existing business that was a platform for some cardiologists that we felt like we could adapt off of. but didn't really have a product idea, this big picture. It was also low capital needs. Unlike medical device, you could build something pretty substantial and launch it for, under $5 million. So we felt like it was worth a swing for a home run. Also, I'll tell you, it was located in London. So with that background, I would ask you, does this meet any of my criteria that I gave you before?
Yeah.
Zero.
Not.
No, it meets zero of my criteria. And it ties into, go ahead.
So the question I have for you then is, what was the one bias that trumped all this other stuff that got you on this? What was the one thing?
Greed and entrepreneurial intoxication. Back to ChatGPT, earlier today I tapped in, what are the 5 mistakes investors make? 5 most prominent, what's the data show? Number 1, greed. They invest when markets are going up, their fear of missing out. So greed and fear. Like, I'd worked in connectivity. I worked in clinical communication as part of the Verb solution with Google. I saw the opportunity to connect ORs and things. This was kind of an extension of that. But look, the CEO had no experience in the domain. Same with the team. I had no experience in the area of building social networks or that technology. I sold friends on the vision, raised over $2 million from friends. I invested a significant amount of capital. We raised a $5-6 million VC round on mine and Justin's reputations. And I didn't really have a lot of experience to make a difference in, making it successful. And I'm reading the background and those issues and kind of shaking my head, like, what was I thinking? At the time. But it was kind of heady times with social networks and the like. But the outcome is highly probable. After 3 or 4 years of trying different things, the product never gained traction. We ended up closing the business, sold off the assets for a minimal amount, tarnished reputation with those VCs, and obviously with friends who lost all their capital. And in retrospect, look, it's not my domain. And you always want to be learning. You always want to be curious. You always want to be growing. But at the same time, I think you got to manage that risk of some of those transitions into new areas appropriately. And I didn't. And so it was not worth it. And we should have probably started smaller and got some proof statements, got the right people, the right VCs, and a CEO with domain experience earlier. So that ended up being a complete write-off and zero, and a lot of time and effort, probably 25% of my time there for a span of 3 years.
What was the probably biggest chunk of collateral damage as a result of that mistake?
I thankfully, enough other successes that there really hasn't been too much collateral damage, if any, at all. And I still have a strong friendship with Justin. I still invest with Justin. I think Justin and I both, have had the discussion about those things and have both said, boy, we need to stick to cardiology and stick to what we know very well. And we continue to look at things in cardiology. And I would definitely invest again, with them, but with things that met our criteria and the criteria versus, stepping too far afield.
That makes sense.
All right, you ready for the fourth one?
Another. I'm ready. Yeah, this is gold. Yes.
Yeah, this is a company called Patara. So a little background here. It's a biotech company, drug device combo, generic drug, coupled with a nebulizer, 3 shots on goal for indications for use. So it has a little bit of portfolio theory. The drug is already approved and presumably works for a clinical indication that we're just going to enhance the benefit by nebulizing it versus taking it orally. I had done an investment like this with the friend who was doing this company before, a company called Elevation Pharmaceutical, where we took a generic drug, nebulized it, so you got a better clinical effect, took it less, and made a 6 to 7 times return on my investment in that deal, which gave me the shiny object, Letterman's jacket syndrome, to do another one. So it looked like $1 billion plus opportunity. Friend is a CEO. We just had a successful exit. It'd be fun to work together, build a great company. Not a lot of value I can add, but it made 6 to 7 times, seemed very similar. I would help him raise some friends and family money. Yes, friends and family again. And show our previous model as an analog. And so did that, raised millions of dollars from friends, sat on the board, granted some additional equity for helping put the deal together. But again, it met how many of my criteria from before?
No, I can't find a single one.
Zero again. Zero.
This was after Wonder?
At the same time.
At the same time. Oh,
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, keep going. All right, I gotta dig. I'm gonna come back.
These 3 deals are all 3 of my first 5 deals, kind of coming out of being a CEO and going into being an investor and working on things. So I clearly did not understand the risks relative to this one. We did not understand the mechanism of action of the drug. It was approved, but I doubt it would pass its trial for its indications that it's used for today. It was very difficult for us to raise venture capital. That should have been a pretty good indicator that on the opportunity. It was an opportunity, but it was a limited market opportunity, so limited buyers. Again, the juice being worth the squeeze or not. But again, entrepreneurial intoxication, we made 6 to 7 times. Roll that money into this, 6 to 7 times that is a big number. And the clinical impact could be significant for the indications. So a little bit of things writing was on the wall, but also some bad luck happened. We were able to raise the venture money, so I had professional venture money. I had a $30 million clinical trial. COVID happened in the middle of the trial, and it was a lung indication. We lost numerous patients to COVID who died, which the study became underpowered, did not meet its endpoints, could not raise the money to redo the trial. And basically, the business had to be, shut down. Again, effectively a zero. Again, lost friends and family's money. And again, didn't have the domain experience, didn't meet my criteria. Again, opportunity cost of doing this versus something else that met my criteria. So less is more, being able to say no. I could have rolled over a little bit of my quote unquote winnings from the last one, because biotech is a little bit like gambling, given its bimodal returns. That's what I should have done, is just, rolled over some of the winnings, sat and watched and encouraged my friend from the sideline. Again, not a bad deal for him. It met all of his criteria. It was a bad deal for me. And so that's his business. That's his specialty. You're going to have wins and losses in biotech. It's important to have portfolio theory work for you. So again, lessons learned, relative to sticking to your criteria and, sticking in areas where you have domain experience and can add value. I could add very little value other than selling the story to help raise some money.
Yeah, and I think it's I think it's really interesting, and I think it's common. Do you feel like a common fallacy that investors fall into is that once they've had a few good investments, they end up with a complex thinking that they can't miss, and then that's when they start venturing into things that they have no idea about?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was referring to, kind of with that Buffett quote. Like, that you have. That's why I think it's always very impressive when you take Elon Musk, who started multiple companies and been successful. There's a lot of people who've had one thing that they hit on and they made it successful, but then they have the next two or three things fail as a CEO. And so I've had a number of successes, all successes as a CEO, and that I think breeds and investments, as I mentioned, at Volcano, and then a couple of things I joined the boards when I was at Volcano, or I had joined NuVasives when I was at Volcano and Verb, and $10 billion exit and merger. So it gives you a false sense of confidence, undoubtedly. And you need to put that aside and do your homework, match against your criteria, do all the right things. There are no free lunches. There are no shortcuts. And you start doing it and you're going to pay the price.
And this is number 4, correct?
Number 4, one last one to go.
Before we get to number 5, I wanted to ask you is, for an investor, after you, let's say you meet a criteria of like a decent market that's at minimum, let's say $1 billion, or if it's, let's say, over 500 mil, but the CAGR is growing, it's maybe over 5%. Like there's something there where, that there's going to be a really large opportunity. So you satisfy that criteria. You see that the CEO matches, let's say, some criteria that says that they're going to be a great CEO and stuff. And of course, like that the product like has potential. I mean, after that, what's kind of left to kind of really make sure that like this is going to be worthwhile investment and to go on that journey? I'm just wondering, like after that, what's left?
Well, it's interesting. What does a board do? What does an investor do? And I think there are 4 buckets that are key for any good board member or investor. Number 1 is CEO. You got to have best in class, best CEO. Make sure you've got that person, and then support the heck out of them. That's number 1. Number 2 is validation of strategy. So you need to, the CEO and the management team are responsible for strategy, but you've got to validate it. And if you're from the domain as an investor or a former operator like me, then you can help them make that strategy better. You're better together, the board and management, and that's operating people on the board and investor types on the board. You can put all those together, and your strategy can improve. You can look at how to execute, be competitive and win in that, adjacencies, business model, et cetera. The third bucket is operational excellence. And so, we were talking before about that book, Barbarians to Bureaucrats, and how companies go through these different phases, and they need different people, process, and systems along the way. Often a CEO has been only in certain phases. They need to be coached and helped in the new phases relative to the people. They're going to need the processes, the systems to match up to where, the business is. And so at Volcano, I had Ron Machikari, who I mentioned earlier. I had Kieran Gallagher, who had taken ResMed from 100 million to $1 billion. I had Roy Tanaka from Biosense Webster, 50 to 800 million in revenue. Alex Luciana from NuVasive, from startup to 500 plus million at that point in time. These guys could help me see around the corner of what to expect. I had never been there. So, that, insight relative to operationalize the business and help it be successful is the third bucket. Then the fourth bucket is just all the governance aspects that a board needs to do in the boxes. They need to check, from making sure everything is run the right way and in legal compliance, et cetera. So a lot to do, but most of it comes down to, bucket number 1, great CEOs hire A players, hire A players, B players, hire C players. You probably have heard great CEOs are able to attract great management teams. They're much better at putting together strategy. They're much better at driving execution, which enhances your probability of success if you're in the right market that you were betting on up front.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think there's definitely a theme here behind like the lessons that you've learned and everything, and I think a lot of it has to do with like knowing yourself, not letting knowing what your ego wants and keeping that in check, and then just doing very thorough, objective due diligence, which is hard to do. It's easier said than done, you know. So that being said, let's go to the fifth and final one.
Fifth and final one is unfortunately Acutus. Acutus was a company here in San Diego in the AFib space with electrophysiology mapping of the heart to guide these AFib procedures. Huge market, large unmet clinical need, definitely multi-billion-dollar opportunity. Good friend again, Vince Burgess, who I mentioned earlier, was my number 2 at Volcano. Done an unbelievable job there. Then he left Volcano and was an investor at Orbimed. At Orbimed, he invested in Acutus. He was so excited about it. He ended up coming in as the CEO off of the board. There was also a strong founder who had a track record of success, multiple successful exits there. Similar business model to Volcano, where we were the diagnostic and we married up with therapy. So similar in this EP mapping. And there was a huge need for improved EP mapping to improve these AFib procedures. Deerfield and Orbimed investors, so super strong investors with great reputations behind them. I knew the prior CFO and COO who had left and moved on to other things. I talked with them. So I did some due diligence, not enough. I didn't go see cases. I relied a lot on Vince and the management team. My fault, not theirs. There were definitely, it was in San Diego. It was close to home. I had a completely clean slate at that time, having just left Verb. So this was something, where I had time to do a day a week, got 2 to 3% equity in the company. It was at Series C, funded level. I got RSUs, more on that later. And I asked for RSUs over options. And plus got comp for doing the work, chairman role, helped the CEO who was a first-time CEO. And so started off. Now, the issues were, there were frictions to its use versus other products. It took extra time. That was told to me, but ways, for us to fix that. So it wouldn't take as much time. The cost to manufacture was very high, which led to a higher price than other mapping technologies, but you got more information. But reimbursement didn't cover it. So was it worth the extra clinical data? Was it worth the extra time? We had to prove that. The clinical outcomes were better, but were they enough better to justify the time or the cost? This is where, back to my Baxterism of, it's going to cost 2 times as much and take twice as long. This is what's happening. It better be 2 times better. Because if it's only 30% better, it's often not worth it. And that's what ended up here. And then we had sales channel issues with access, personnel decisions, et cetera. So the outcome was we launched the product. We kept missing sales projections, but we were growing, still had 10 plus million in sales rather quickly. We added another crossing device, which was successful in a small M&A transaction. We ended up, the markets opened up for these high growth opportunities. We went public to raise needed money because we were burning $40 million a year. And this was the time of SPACs and easy money, aggressive projections. So our sales grew, but we were losing more money than sales. The idea was we would continue to grow. We'd grow into our size. We'd get cost of goods sold down, leverage our sales force. And the stock went up. The stock ended up going up to over $1 billion market cap. Well, and those RSUs vested at $30 and $18 a share. And with RSUs, it's ordinary income. So I had $7 to $8 million in taxes due. And that became my basis in the stock. But the stock was worth, 15 or 16 million, and so pay the taxes. You're still, you've been doing this a day a week and you're, up $8 million. Not a bad deal after a few years. So The problem is if the stock goes down, now you're underwater, obviously. Versus an option, you exercise at a low price, and you come out of pocket for that, and when you sell it, you pay taxes. So our value proposition over time did not work out. The time wasn't worth the clinical benefit. We couldn't get the cost down. We ended up selling the crossing device to Medtronic for close to $200 million, all public information, to help finance the company. At the same time, the competitive dynamics changed, where all of these pulse field ablation catheters came out, and all the electrophysiologists' attentions diverted to using those versus figuring out how to improve mapping. We still need improved mapping to improve PFA, but a little market timing issue. And so we got to a point where the markets just have been really tight a couple of years ago, and not able to raise the capital, not able to finance the growth, and had to make some tough decisions on, shutting the business down and running out the supply agreement with Medtronic and returning the cash to investors as being the highest outcome. And that's what we ended up doing. So today the stock price is effectively zero. And so my $7-8 million is now worth zero. So I have $7-8 million of tax losses. Again, I got friends to invest in our IPO, where I made it available to them. So they invested in the IPO. Some of them end up selling when their shares became unlocked, and maybe got their money back. Some had some losses out of that. Again, friends lost money. So a number of issues here. Number one is, RSUs can be good in that you invest into this and you're able to not have to come out of pocket per se to exercise an option. But when they vest, I didn't expect them. I didn't expect us to be public. I expected us to be private, and they would vest at a low price, and low tax basis would occur. Ended up with a high tax basis as a result, and a big tax loss. I didn't understand the market well enough to see what was happening with PFA coming, and didn't do adequate due diligence up front. So some of those criteria on technical risk and market access risk, I thought were green, were actually red. And then I put myself in a position with RSUs to overly invest in something that I didn't really want to invest. I wouldn't have invested $7-8 million in, and kind of got pregnant with that investment. And then the last thing is back to the CEO. Vince is a great investor and a great VP of business development and strategy, but he would tell you, he's not the best, CEO, and we probably should have had a different CEO earlier than we did. So it ended up being a very painful, situation relative to the outcome, where you go public, you reach $1 billion market cap, and you end up, effectively returning maybe $150-200 million to investors at the end of the day. And a worse outcome as it relates to me relative to the RSUs and losing $7-8 million. But the nice thing is I've got other successes to offset those losses against. But you got the time value of money involved in that situation. So definitely not a good outcome when you make it all the way public and have to dissolve a company.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And again, I think, what's interesting about all these 5 failures that you mentioned in the lessons is that it's hard to pin them down on like one specific bias or fallacy. It seems like it was kind of like the perfect storm of different things that kind of came together to force you to make like the wrong decision. And I think probably the most important thing that I'm getting from all this is the importance of having that very specific and objective criteria that you kind of go through as a checklist, and you pressure test each one. And then if you don't have every single one of those pieces, then you have to really make sure that the other pieces like really overcompensate. Like, I don't know, if maybe you have a first time founder, you don't know if it's a great CEO or not, but the market is just phenomenal, then like that kind of helps.
Yeah,
But I think
you
it's
can live
really
with that
important.
person for a couple of years, and you know you're going to need to. If they don't grow, you're going to have to change them. That's
I
okay.
got one. I got one for you. I think is that if you have a first time founder and you don't know whether they're going to be a good CEO or not, the next question is like, okay, is this person coachable enough where they're going to take our guidance? And then if they're not doing what's necessarily, are they going to do the right thing for the business and bring in not only a supporting cast around them, but maybe at some point, like if it's a technical founder, they say, hey, I'm going to move into a CTO role and we got to get a experienced CEO. And are they open to those kind of things?
Absolutely, and take Lucid, where I'm on the board and the chairman. Blake Richards is going to be a CEO. He was the CEO when I joined, but we knew relative to commercializing, raising the venture necessary, we needed a more seasoned CEO. But Blake was way too important to the business to lose, and could contribute immeasurably, and he is. And so he is coachable. I'm still mentoring and coaching him as much as he wants. He's going to be a CEO in the future. He's going to be a really great CEO in the future. It's just the timing of when we needed a set of experience didn't match up with where he was. And I think he was smart enough to say, what are my criteria in my career right now? I want to be a part of a big successful company. I want to learn from people like Scott on the board, other people on the board, Kelly, who's our CEO. And so that transition has worked, terrific. And then there are other situations where they're first time CEOs of public companies or private companies, and they're very open to learning. On Target, where Bill Peters is our CEO since the beginning, part of the year, he is phenomenal. He grew ConMed from 80 to 600 plus million, kind of as a number two. But it's his first time, being a CEO, and he'll be a first time public company CEO when we grow to be that. And, I along with others on the board, Bernie Haffrey, who's been a CEO of public, we coach, and he's open to living, learning, and growing. And so those are fun, things to accomplish from the board. When you have someone who's not willing to live and learn and progress, that would be a challenge. I generally, I try and ferret that out before I join the board, that someone's willing and they want, like I wanted, a Kieran, an Alex, a Ron on their board who've been these successful CEOs to help coach them and that they can learn from. We don't want their job. We're done wanting to be a CEO, but we want them to be successful. We want their management to be successful. We want the company to be successful for patients, for them, and for investors, in that order, generally.
No, that makes complete sense. And Scott, I want to thank you for putting in the time and of course coming back on the show and sharing all of this. I really appreciate it. For those who've been listening, be sure to forward this on to an entrepreneur and an investor, and be sure to like and give the show 5 stars. And last thing for you, Scott, before we let you go, and again, we appreciate you spending this much time with us, is both of us are big readers. For some of the criteria you mentioned, some of the things that you talked about, is there a book and or books that you feel like you gift or recommend most often to young investors or CEOs?
Yeah, so for CEOs, like I mentioned the book here, that book, Barbarians to Bureaucrats, is a very simple, straightforward book. It's, companies are generally started by these prophets who have an idea, and then, a barbarian takes over to get it to market, and then a growth CEO, and you hit a synergistic point. You hopefully don't go then over into this bureaucratic and aristocratic phase. But there are different systems, people, and processes needed to match up to each phase as you go along that path. So that's one that I definitely recommend. Another one about just kind of understanding yourself and your identity and your goals is, there's a book from the guys at Stanford Business School, and it's basically the scientific method, and you've got 3 hypotheses that you're testing against, but it's planning in doing checking and adjusting relative to your career and or investment. So I recommend that book quite often, and the name of it is escaping me right now. You can put it in the notes to this, afterwards as well. But that's another a book. And then I mentioned also in this Positive Intelligence, which is Shahzad Shameen it's been a New York Times bestseller. He worked with us at Volcano. He's worked with my YPO forum over the years. And it's about understanding yourself better and others so that you can, it's not about being right. It's about being effective. So understanding yourself and others allows you to be a better leader, how to understand customers, how to understand investors, and the like. So I also find that's also a great book for the front end that we talked about. The first Stanford book on your plan and goal setting, understanding yourself, and then understanding what's needed at different phases is more barbarians to bureaucrats.
Perfect. Well, Scott, thank you so much for the recommendations. And again, for those who are listening, be sure to forward this on to somebody that you know. I'm your host, Omar Khatib. And as always, we'll see you all next time.
Thank you, Omar.
Thanks for checking out this episode. If you want to do me a big favor and join so many other people who have helped grow this podcast, take a second and look below. If you're on Apple, give us 5 stars and write a short review. If you're on Spotify, just give us 5 stars. And if you're on YouTube, hit the like button. And most importantly, if you can, subscribe. We release so many different episodes that you may miss. Be sure to subscribe and turn your notifications on. You get extra points with me if you subscribe across all 3 channels. Thank you so much. And if you felt like this episode helped you, send this to somebody who would really enjoy and appreciate it. Share and spread the love. We'll see you all next time.